Okay, folks, we're continuing our spoiler review of Ethan Van Sciver's Cyberfrog Bloodhoney Ultimate Edition. The last video, I covered most of Part 2. I'm going to be covering the rest of Part 2 and Part 3 today. And then the Diary of Heather Swain, which is Cyberfrog, also called Cyberfrog 1998, I am going to be saving for a future video. So this is just going to cover the remainder of Cyberfrog Bloodhoney. Again, if you have missed the previous video, go back and watch that first, and then that'll catch you up to the point that I'm about to go over, although I will be going over some of the same complaints that I've had about some of the artwork in the book at the start, or in the previous video, namely this incredibly annoying page, which I'm about to show you now. So this page is our introduction. You may recall from the previous video that at one point Cyberfrog and Salamandroid were going to have to tackle Rumblebee and Pollen-8. And these are characters that we have not seen before, so this is really going to be our introduction to Rumblebee and Pollen-8, because one of the things that was lacking in the earliest portion of Bloodhoney, the 17-page montage recapitulating Cyberfrog's past adventures, there was no rogues gallery. There was nothing to show us who these characters were, you know, whether it be Rumblebee, Pollen-8, Tromadeus, Scorpion, any of these characters. We don't know who they are. So what we're seeing here is Rumblebee and one of the Pollen-8 clones for the first time. And can you see them? I sure as hell can't. They're all the way back there. The focus is all the way back there. You've got Cyberfrog almost tiny, and then you've got Salamandroid dominating as if he's like the most important thing in the picture. And here we have another one of my pet peeves, which is panel breakage. You don't really want to break panels whenever you don't have to, and part of the ridiculousness of this part of there being panel breakage in this particular panel is that you can't get away from the end of the page, so why bother getting away from the end of the panel? Just go ahead and draw up to the edge of the panel, and then the reader doesn't have to think any harder than he normally does. Because most readers have trained themselves over years of comic book reading to basically say, okay, here's this panel, and I'm going to read everything to do with it, with what is within this panel. And then I will move to the next panel, and I will read everything that there is to do within that panel. And then I'll move to the next panel, and I'll read everything that's to do. When you break panels, you're sending the reader's eyes all over the place, and the reader doesn't know what the hell he's looking at. So you've got this Salamandroid who is, in a number of ways, breaking the panel boundaries, because first he's breaking the panel boundary up here with his little shoulder things. That's not too terrible, but at the same time, it's not necessary. Then you've got his foot going off here. Is there something particularly important about his foot that we need to see it? You've already got the tail clipped by the edge of the page. We don't need to see what's beyond the panel either. And then this portion comes back around, and it took me a while to figure out that this thing right here is the edge of Salamandroid's tail, which is whipped all the way around and come back out the top of the panel. Like, stop. Just stop, okay? Show us a good scene. And one of the things that's bad about this scene is that it's the first scene that introduces your villain characters for this particular segment, and we can't even see them. So now we get a full-on picture of, I don't know, because his name's not mentioned here either. This is either Rumblebee or this is one of the Pollen-8 clones. I don't know which it is. I kind of assume it's Rumblebee just because he's speaking first, but that's not necessarily the case. So how am I supposed to know? Well, I know from, the next panel of dialogue, but I have to get all the way through this panel of confusion, not knowing who this character is, before I get to the next panel, and that's where the character's finally named. And look at this, we got more panel breakage, and it's pointing me back up to this scene. Is there something I missed in this scene that you need to, overlay part of this scene with information from this panel? I don't think so. Just leave it alone. Keep this panel confined. Same thing here. I'm looking now at a foot that's overlapping on, God, I don't even freaking know what this is. Do you know how long it took me to figure out that this is actually Rumblebee's head? You know why? Because it's colored differently. This is a red thing that I can barely see with a couple of stalks coming out of it, And now I've got, I realize, oh, that's got to be Rumblebee's head, because that's the only thing that has that same shape and has only 2 stalks coming out of it. I couldn't tell for the longest time what the hell this thing was. I was going to have to ask. I mean, oh, God. So you've got, and the other thing is, another one of my pet peeves is getting smacked in the face by the artwork. You've got these 2 really, really close-up panels that don't really set the scene, because you're only focusing on like a really close-up snippet. And you've got Cyberfrog completely filling up this particular thing. Do you know? And he's got some panel breakage here too, which is also very distracting. Distracting to the point that I read this page probably 4 or 5 times before I ever realized Salamandroid was in it, because I was too confused trying to figure out what the hell this was, and then distracted by the panel breakage from Cyberfrog. And just having him smack up in the face. It's almost like when you have a character that is dominating the foreground almost so completely, how do you even care about what's in the background? And there was a whole other character in there. I was just amazed to see that. I didn't realize he was there. Really. 4 or 5 times I read this and I never noticed he was there. So now we move on to the next page. And there's a little bit of dialogue here that is a little bit... It's one of those anticipation moments from Rocky Horror Picture Show, because Cyberfrog says, "Keep talking, Rumblebee, keep running, you're big." And I'm thinking, okay, well, the next logical word to come out of his mouth is going to be mouth. So maybe there's something else on the next page that's going to be different from that. Or maybe the fact that Cyberfrog is talking smack in mid-leap means he's going to be, like, taken down by one of the other characters, maybe one of the Pollen 8 clones or something. But there's got to be something about this, this ... and he hasn't finished his sentence yet, right? No, he does exactly what you'd expect in the next panel. He finishes by saying mouth, and he smacks Rumblebee in the mouth. I mean, that's basically it. So now we see more clearly one of the Pollen 8 clones, and it took me a while to realize, because now I'm looking at the Pollen 8 clones, and you would kind of think that since it's Pollen 8 and there's 8 of them, you might like take this panel opportunity to show all 8 of them at once. But instead we get like 3 different scenes, and it's like, well, I guess there's no point in trying to count them, because I wouldn't know if any of the clones are ones that were counted from one of the previous panels. So yeah, I'm just going to have to take his word for it that there's 8 of them. Yeah, and it took me a while to figure out that I have to make a distinguishing between the red eyes and red suit of Rumblebee and the green eyes and green and purple suits of the Pollen 8 crew, who I guess are clones of Rumblebee. That was another thing that wasn't established immediately, is like, who are they clones of? Well, now that I can get a better look at them, I mean, I see that they're clones of Rumblebee, but they didn't actually have to be, so that a little bit of explanation on that part would have been nice. And so now that they've attacked Cyberfrog, and that pisses off Salamandroid to no end. So that triggers this scene where we get a nice car crush scene. But before that, we have this inset panel that is showing us Salamandroid, a kind of a over-the-shoulder view of Salamandroid grabbing with one hand this car. It's a completely unnecessary panel. I mean, if we just go from this to him being angry to this point where he's smashing a car down on them, I mean, he's been off panel for 4 panels already. We don't know what he's been doing up to this point. You don't even have to show us. You could just assume that, oh, he must have picked up a car in the interim. And besides, this is a very cluttered panel. You've got his shoulder blades getting in the way of the scene of him picking up the car. So it's like, just drop the panel already. It doesn't need to be that complicated. So, and of course, we get a dad joke on this page, by the way. Now you're Pollen 7, which is kind of funny. Except I think to myself, God, I hope he doesn't go through like the whole number sequence as he's destroying these Pollen 8 clones one by one. And he completely freaking does. He's got four panels here of going to Pollen 6, Pollen 5, Pollen 4, Pollen 3. And I'm just like, oh, God, he's doing a dad joke times 5. Oh. So the next scene we see this gives us a little bit of a segue, and after he gets down to Pollen 3, we get a segue back to President Clinton, who was in the previous video. He had started giving his speech about how he had been having an affair with Monica Lewinsky. Remember, this comic book is set in 1998. It's not set in 2018 or 2022. It's set back in 1998, and there was a broadcast from the White House in which President Clinton actually announced to the world, I don't know if you're old enough to remember this, that he had had an affair with Monica Lewinsky and that he had lied about it, and not that he had lied under oath, although he did, but basically trying to do a let's get on with our lives kind of video, which backfired and really just started a firestorm. But at this point, we see in Washington, D.C. that the Vispas are landing, and President Clinton is getting rushed off to, whatever Secret Service bunker there is for him. I mean, good luck with that. And then we head back to Philadelphia, where Cyberfrog and Salamandroid are fighting Rumblebee and the clones. And that is when the Vispas descend on Philadelphia. And there is a beautiful, beautiful scene here. It's a 2-page spread, where they're basically, here's the Vispas coming down, and you've got Salamandroid in the foreground, Cyberfrog in the foreground, you've got the Rumblebee and at least 2 of the remaining Pollinate clones, basically all in shock at the fact that this massive, massive alien invasion is coming down, and it is an impressive page. The only thing that's wrong on this page that I would say is that because it's a 2-page spread, the reader's eyes naturally go kind of looking down the page, scanning down it. And so this piece of dialogue more naturally runs over to this piece of dialogue instead of to here, where this is actually supposed to be the next bubble. So we have a dialogue bubble problem on this 2-page spread. What you really want to read is this part by Salamandroid first, where he's like, hey, is this you, talking to Rumblebee, and Rumblebee's like, are you stupid? And then it's supposed to be Cyberfrog taking it up from there. So from there we move on to the next page. And on the next page, we have Cyberfrog. Basically, Rumblebee and the Pollinate crew split because this is just way out of their league. They're not going to be able to do anything about this, and they don't care anyway. I mean, their mission was to carry some guns, grenades, and bombs in a truck over to Scorpion, who is like the mob boss of Philadelphia. And so Cyberfrog is desperately trying to contact Chell Sin. Chell Sin, of course, has been completely incapacitated by the Vespas because she revealed her hiding position and to save some humans, which she didn't even manage that. So it was a really dumb move on her part. So she is actually offline, and that means Cyberfrog cannot be rapid evolved to acquire all of the cybernetics that he needs in order to fight off the Vispas. He's stuck in his present form. That's not good. So the only thing that we see is Cyberfrog at this point is jumping onto the truck that was full of the bombs and grenades and stuff that were going to be delivered to Scorpion by Pollinate and Rumblebee. And Cyberfrog's trying to figure out what the hell happened to Chell Sin, and informs Salamandroid that, we're kind of screwed here, but we've got to be up to the fight. And so Salamandroid dives in and is completely overwhelmed by the Vespas. That's the last that we see of him. Cyberfrog is fighting on top of the truck that has all of those munitions that Pollinate and Rumblebee were carrying. And it's a stationary truck. And that becomes a problem on the next page, because Cyberfrog is fighting on top of this stationary truck. He's thinking about, okay, well, Chell Sin must be down. I'm isolated. Everything that I know is being separated from me. And then he realizes for a second, Heather. Now, I'm of 2 minds about Cyberfrog's mentioning Heather at this point, because he's in the middle of a fight for his life, and all of a sudden he thinks of this girl who is his best friend, and not really focused on the battle, and you almost think that he's having a life flashing before his eyes moment, or at least that's how the story would kind of give it, on account of the fact that he's being overwhelmed by Vispas after Vispas. I mean, he's still holding his own, he's still fighting them off, but the fact that he's thinking of Heather at this point, you almost think, oh my God, is he going to die at this moment? But really, he's just worried about the fact that she's by herself. And but before he can do anything about that, before he can even think about taking off to save her, all of a sudden there is this truck that is speeding toward his truck, and there is a huge problem on this page, which is an overabundance of speed lines, because this truck is supposed to be stationary, and yet it is just as covered in speed lines as everything else. And this truck is rushing toward it at breakneck speed. Not only that, but you can see from this truck's point of view, there's no cars in the way. There's no cars on this side of the truck such that there would be any cars to ram out of the way by the truck in this case. So I don't know where these two cars appeared from. But by the same dint, you're still seeing a bunch of speed lines surrounding this truck as if it's moving when it's not. And then you've got the final collision scene, and so I'm looking at this page thinking that the truck is actually in motion, that the one that Cyberfrog's on, when it's not supposed to be. Because I was wondering why in the world would a tap from this car cause all of this stuff to explode? Well, true, it is filled with munitions, so, there's guns, grenades, bombs, stuff like that. So, yeah, it could very well explode, but with a tap, you would think the merchandise is a little bit more well secured than that. But at the same time, if it was clear that this was a truck going at breakneck speed, hitting the back of this stationary truck, then we would understand that, oh my God, that must have been a huge impact. And so last thing we see from this particular portion of part 2 is Cyberfrog falling into the river, and he's being coated in all of these kind of nodules that are going to regenerate him over time. Over how much time? Well, that's really anybody's guess. And so that's where we end part 2. We have Cyberfrog in a hibernation regeneration mode, and we have no idea how long this is going to take. So, of course, at the beginning of part 3, we see that Cyberfrog is actually going to be released from these nodules that have surrounded him. His system comes back online, the cells disengage, he's back in fighting shape. All right, it's time to get back into the fight, right? Not so much, because the moment he surfaces, what he sees is a world completely taken over by the Vispas. And this portion here, these portions that are inset into here, I'm of two minds about them. I mean, I kind of understand that what Ethan Van Sciver's trying to do is try and show that there's like tons and tons and tons of these hornets all flying around and stuff, communicating back and forth with each other, and that's pretty much all that there is. But you would almost think that just seeing this large background with the Vispas and the ships and all of the honeycomb-coated buildings would be enough to kind of be this kind of devastation, and you could just sit with this panel for a while and think, oh my God, what if I had woken up into this kind of world? What would things be like for me? What emotions would I be feeling, etc., if I were seeing this devastation? But instead, we've got all of this busyness out here, and busyness, I mean, no pun intended, going on with all these individual Vispas kind of communicating back and forth with each other, saying what? We have no idea, because they're not actually saying anything in a language that we can understand. And it just feels kind of, I mean, again, no pun intended, busy. So the next scene we have is Cyberfrog totally overcome by what he sees. He dives to the bottom of the lake, and then he springs up out of the lake, and then he lets out this ferocious croak. And there's two things I don't really understand here. Well, first of all, I don't understand why somebody felt the need to put a hyphen in the middle of the croak. If you can see here, he's got the K-E-R and then a double hyphen here, which would kind of imply that there's another syllable to be said. Well, the problem with that is that if you read this just along the line, then you would understand that what he's saying is Kirog. Okay, so it's a big giant croak. But with that double hyphen in there, that made me switch to look over to the left again, and I wound up with Kiergork. And obviously, that's not really what it's supposed to be, but who the hell could know the first time you're reading this? I mean, you should really just have had no double hyphen there, and that way the letters would have all trailed into each other, and we would have been able to follow that just fine. But the other thing that doesn't make sense is, why is he announcing his presence to the world? This is a world that he's woken up into that's completely taken over by the Vispas, and the first thing that he does is, like, fire off an air horn? That doesn't make any sense. I mean, unless it's like some like natural frog instinct or something, but at the same time, what do we know about natural frog instincts? I mean, we're not frog experts. So the fact that he does this croaking, or maybe that's some sort of propulsion for him. Maybe he's croaking and he's, giving himself some backwards force by which to propel himself onto land, because he is in the middle of the water. But I mean, this is the first time I've thought of it, is that maybe he's croaking, he takes in this like huge amount of air, and then he lets it out in this huge croak, and maybe what he's doing is he's giving himself some sideways propulsion in order for him to fly through the air and then get onto land, where he's going to do some annoying panel breakage again. But actually, for there to be some disorienting panel breakage in this scene where he himself is disoriented, that actually kind of makes sense, and I don't mind it so much. But what I do mind is this little inset piece where you've got a Vispas who notices him, but this Vispas doesn't make any appearance. It doesn't try to attack him. It doesn't try to do anything to him. It just notes that he's there, and that's about it. And it doesn't even show that he's being followed by it or anything like that. So why is that Vispas even shown there? I mean, with all the Vispas that you've shown before in the previous double-page spread, you don't have to show that there's like a Vispas. There's like, oh, gee, what's the croaking noise? Something like that. I don't know. But yeah, that's kind of just a distracting panel that doesn't need to be there. So then. Cyberfrog's first reaction is, where is, I don't even know if this is still Earth. Oh my God, where is Heather? There was a portion of this that kind of turned me off in the fact that, okay, the last thing that he actually saw happening right in front of him was Salamandroid getting overcome by the Vispas. You would think that his first thought would be, where's Sal? Where is my brother? Where did Salamandroid go? Is he dead? Is he alive? And then he would think of Heather, because, then it's kind of like, okay, well, I don't know, then what do I know? And then realize this, okay, well, I know where Heather is because I've got that tracking microbead that I implanted in her, and I covered some of that in the last video, but basically he's going to be able to find her wherever she is. And so he takes off to find her. And then we get a giant page overseeing the New Jersey Pine Barrens. So apparently we've just had this massive scene change. We don't know why, but we're now in the New Jersey Pine Barrens, and we're getting a list of rules, survival rules, told to a little girl who is getting made up by her mother with like red coloring on her face, and also being dressed in red because she's planning on going out into the woods apparently. And one of the rules is always wear red, because red will hide you from the Vispas. They can't see the color red. So it turns out this woman's this young girl's getting made up by her mother, and we don't see the mother, we just see the young girl, and she's all dressed up in red. So she's going out, and it turns out she's going to look for her dad, because her dad was taken by the Vispas or something like that. Now, does her mother know that she's going out to look for her dad? Because that doesn't seem like the kind of mission you would assign to a little girl. That seems more like, oh, I guess I'm going out to play, but why would you have your daughter go out and play in the woods? Is she going to be playing like survival games, or, the scene doesn't really make that much sense to me. And moreover, there's a little girl named Megan featured in this panel, and she's prominently displayed, and yet we don't see her again. And that leads me to think that maybe somebody won a contest or something where, she is going to have her face drawn into Cyberfrog, or maybe this is somebody, I don't know if it could potentially be Ethan's daughter. He's got a young daughter, so maybe he drew her face into Cyberfrog so he could show, look, honey, you're in the book. I don't know, but at the same time, it's like, this is distracting as hell, because why are we getting a full face view of this girl who's like meaningless in terms of, other than just basically naming the girl, because she does say to the girl, "Hey, Lily," and then she says, "Well, where are you going?" And to look for him, meaning her father. I assume it's her father. I mean, why doesn't she say to look for my dad? I mean, she could easily say that and make it all kinds of clear. So the next page and the last page of Bloodhoney, we see Cyberfrog encountering this young girl a few steps later. In other words, she just leaves this young girl's company, and a few steps later, here's Cyberfrog clinging on a tree. And this is like the most... Why are they meeting like this? You know, this is like almost a, oh, hey, you know, hey there, kind of meeting, as opposed to she's walking and seeing a giant cybernetic frog clinging to a tree for the very first time. How does she not completely freak out about that? Well, actually, there's a good reason that she's not completely freaking out about that, but we should expect her to completely freak out about that, and therefore the meeting between the two of them should be told in panels more consequential than this, where you barely see Cyberfrog and the girl meet. And then the girl says, "I know who you are. My mom's got a tattoo of you. It looks just like you." Cyberfrog says, "You know, your mom." And then the girl says, "Mom." Cyberfrog's back. And then we get to see a picture of a much more grown-up Heather Swain, because we find out it's about 10 years later. He's been hibernating for about 10 years. And I just noticed that she doesn't even have a question mark, like, Froggy? You know, it's been 10 years since she last saw him, and she almost seems like, you know, nonchalantly reacting to the fact that he's back. So, yeah. And that is the end of Cyberfrog Bloodhoney. We pick up next time in Cyberfrog 2 Wrecked Planet. However, Cyberfrog 1998 is going to tell us the Vizbaz invasion from Heather Swain's point of view, as well as giving us a little bit of background to the Vizbaz invasion. So I will be covering that in the next spoiler review of the Ultimate Cyberfrog Bloodhoney edition. But now that I've gone through that, I don't know if I really want to talk about the writing at this point, because I still have one more portion of the book to go through. So yeah, I think I'm just going to leave it here, and I'm gonna cleanse my palate for one thing, because the next book, Cyberfrog 1998, kind of falls into a Rashomon kind of mode, where now you're seeing the Vizbaz invasion from the perspective of Heather Swain, and so you're going to wind up kind of encountering some of the same events, but it'll be from her perspective and things that happen directly to her. And I'm going to need to read something else first as a palate cleanser, so I'm actually this is completely sidebar information, but I picked up Kari Andrews and Brian Raber's Erratic, and I'm going to read that before I read the Diary of Heather Swain, just to give my mind a little bit of a palate cleanser, to see what it's like to read these as two separate books, as opposed to, you know, one experience directly after the other. So that's it for now. I'll make the other video as soon as I can, but until then, please do subscribe, and I will talk to you later.